Welcome to Hardly. Each book is distilled into 3 stories, giving you the key ideas in minutes. Elias Dakwar's book, The Captive Imagination, explores the multifaceted nature of addiction and its interplay with human consciousness. Today we listen. The Captive Imagination, on drugs, dreams, and human despair, in which we probe into the distorted promises of freedom through addiction, the blurred line between reality and unreality in human experience, the paradox of happiness and suffering in the modern age. Elias Dakwar works as a psychiatrist, addiction specialist, researcher, and associate professor of psychiatry at Columbia University. Don't go away. Hardly the editor will be right back with the story. Today, let's follow the stories of 3 individuals grappling with addiction, all seeking escape from a reality that feels too heavy, too real, or too painful to bear. Their journeys reflect the tension between the dream of freedom and the harsh realities they face, illuminating the deceptive allure of drugs and the elusive quest for happiness. Ahmed, a curriculum developer for troubled youths, found himself circling the same hospital corridor repeatedly. After multiple relapses and overdoses, he knew what was at stake but could not break the cycle. "I just want to get started on the rest of my life," he said, with a tone of determination that, to an outsider, might sound like hope. But Ahmed's restless pacing revealed more. A deeper agitation rooted in the very thing he claimed to want to escape from. Ahmed's struggle was not just with heroin, but with the suffocating sense of inertia. He believed that if he could just leave the hospital, he could fix his life. The irony, of course, is that leaving too soon would likely end his life instead. The shot he was scheduled to receive would block the effects of opioids for a month, safeguarding him from a fatal relapse. Yet, his desire for freedom was intertwined with his addiction, the very thing pulling him back into the abyss. What Ahmed's story teaches us is that the desire for freedom is often distorted in addiction. The freedom he sought was within reach, but only if he stayed the course. The solution, though painful, lay in staying still, waiting, trusting, and resisting the urge to run. True freedom begins when we stop trying to escape ourselves and instead confront the discomfort head-on. As Ahmed wrestled with his impulses, another story unfolded in the hospital. A woman, Sophie, sat in silence, eyes fixed on a blank wall. She had been clean for 6 months, but found herself on the brink of a relapse, haunted by a single recurring dream. "I'm falling," she would say, "but I never hit the ground." In her dream, she was always teetering between 2 realities. One where she had a stable job, a family, a life she had fought to rebuild, and another where she was consumed by darkness, slipping back into the chaos of her former addiction. Sophie's dream represented more than just a fear of failure. It reflected the duality of her existence, the constant balancing act between who she was and who she feared becoming again. Her fear of hitting the ground was the fear of losing control, of succumbing to the comfort of the familiar, even if the familiar meant destruction. The dream blurred the line between her waking reality and the unreality of her fears. Sophie's story offers a powerful insight. Sometimes, it is not the reality of the fall that paralyzes us, but the fear of what we imagine will happen when we hit the ground. To move forward, Sophie had to learn to trust that even if she fell, she had the strength to stand up again. The solution for her wasn't in avoiding the fall, but in embracing the possibility of resilience, knowing that survival doesn't always mean avoiding failure. It means facing it head-on. As Sophie grappled with her dreams, another patient, Max, confronted a very different kind of nightmare. Max's story was one of rebellion, having lived his whole life pushing against societal expectations. He believed that by rejecting the conventional path, he had found freedom. But his freedom was tied to an addiction to methamphetamines, which he had used to fuel his creative work. Max described his addiction as a necessary tool, a way to keep the creative juices flowing. He believed the meth allowed him to access deeper parts of his imagination, parts that sobriety had shut off. But as time went on, Max's creative bursts became fewer and farther between, and his body and mind began to break down. The drug that had once inspired him now imprisoned him. "It's like being chained to a rocket," Max explained. "You're going somewhere, but you're not sure if it's up or down." The more Max relied on meth to fuel his creativity, the more distant he became from the very freedom he sought. His mind, once a source of boundless imagination, was now a chaotic whirlpool of paranoia and despair. Max's story illustrates the dangerous paradox of addiction. The very thing that promises expansion can lead to a terrifying contraction of one's world. The solution, though not easy, required Max to rediscover creativity without the crutch of meth, to trust that his mind, in its natural state, could be just as imaginative, if not more so. True creativity, like freedom, comes not from escaping reality, but from engaging with it fully, flaws and all. As Ahmed, Sophie, and Max's stories unfold, a common thread emerges: the illusion that freedom and happiness can be achieved through escape. For Ahmed, it was the freedom to leave the hospital, but the reality was that leaving would bring him closer to death. For Sophie, it was the fear of falling that kept her paralyzed, when in truth, it was her resilience that would save her. And for Max, it was the belief that his creativity depended on meth, when in fact, the drug was destroying the very source of his inspiration. In all three cases, addiction blurred the line between reality and unreality, offering false promises of freedom while leading them deeper into captivity. The path to healing, for each of them, lay not in escaping their circumstances, but in facing them head-on, finding the courage to confront the uncomfortable truths about themselves and their desires. As the editor of Hardly, I believe that through these stories, we can begin to recognize the ways we too are tempted by false freedoms. Our future may depend not on how much we can escape, but on how much we can endure. How willing we are to sit with discomfort, uncertainty, and pain, knowing that true growth comes from facing what we most want to avoid. Each story comes from the most representative real-life cases selected by the Hardly team from this book. There are 11 more stories equally worth reading, each delving deeper into the intricacies of addiction, desire, and the human condition. If you wish to dive deeper, we recommend purchasing the full book. The key ideas explored in this book, freedom through addiction, the blurred line between reality and unreality, and the paradox of happiness and suffering, come into sharp focus in yet another unforgettable story. Consider the case of Daniel, a former tech executive who seemed to have everything: wealth, success, and a picture-perfect family. But beneath the surface, Daniel was drowning in addiction to prescription painkillers. He described his addiction as a gradual drift into an unreal world where nothing seemed real except the pills. Daniel found solace in the artificial sense of control the drugs gave him, masking the emotional pain and insecurities he had buried deep for years. As his addiction spiraled, his professional and personal life collapsed. Eventually, it wasn't the drugs that shattered his life, but his refusal to face the truth about his suffering. I thought I was escaping, but all I did was lock myself in a prison of my own making. Daniel's journey mirrors the core themes of this book. His belief in the illusion of control, the separation between reality and the mind's creation, and the profound suffering masked by a false pursuit of happiness are all too familiar in the stories of addiction. In revisiting these themes, we are reminded that addiction's promises of freedom are often traps, and real growth comes from confronting, not fleeing, our realities. As the editor of Hardly, I believe that understanding these stories helps us challenge our own illusions and find healthier paths to freedom and fulfillment.